Welcome everyone. Welcome to this first session of Dualities, the Marriage of Opposites. I'm James Barbieri. I'm Associate Program Director here at the Price Center, and I will be your host for this session and series. So as a host, if you have any issues, technical or not, feel free to just message me in the chat and we'll try to help you out. So today's the first session of Dualities, the Marriage of Opposites, where we're going to explore the fascinating and seamlessly endless topic of dualities, where together with experts and scholars, we'll examine the meaning of dualities and opposites in various disciplines, such as physics, philosophy, spirituality, literature, psychology, and reality. Today, we are joined by Anjali D'Souza, Andrew Fellows, and Shantena Sabbadini, who will be in conversation about duality and non-duality in the East and the West. Anjali is a Jungian analyst with 20 years of experience working in India using a multi-systemic approach shaped by her own experiences, C.G. Jung, the expressive arts, Indian philosophy, and gender and post-colonial studies. Hello, Anjali. We also have Andrew, who is a recurring speaker and an advisor here at the Quarry Center. But for those who don't know him, he is a Jungian analyst with a private practice in Switzerland, a deep ecologist and writer. His special interests include anima mundi, the midlife transition, the new sciences, and the use of depth psychology to understand and address global collective and environmental problems. Hi, Andrew. And finally, we have Shantena, the rector of the Quarry Center, who's had an extensive career. He is a physicist, where he worked at the University of California, where he contributed to the theoretical work behind the first identification of a black hole. And he later became scientific consultant at the Eranos Foundation, a center founded by Jung, and translated Chinese classics such as the I Ching and the Tao Te Ching. Good to see you again, Shantena, and welcome everyone. Just before we begin, just because we have a few newcomers, I'd just like to go through a couple of guidelines for this session. So first of all, we ask participants to please mute your microphone during the session, just to avoid any background noise. We might mute you if we hear any background noise, but we're not here to silence you. But at the same time, we do encourage you all to turn on your cameras, because it's nice seeing everyone's faces and creates a nice inclusive education environment. During the Q&A and discussion, which will be on the second part of this session, to ask a question, you can use the raise your hand function on Zoom, which can be found at the bottom right of your screen. Otherwise, you can physically raise your hand, and if I spot you, I'll call out your name. Or if it makes you feel more comfortable, you can write your question in the chat, and I can read it out for you. Regarding the Q&A, as we would like to give everyone the opportunity to ask questions, and it's quite a big group, we ask to keep your questions short and focused. We also ask you to please reserve any follow-up questions until everyone's had the opportunity to participate, and then we'll circle back to you if that's okay with everyone. Finally, this session is recorded for archival purposes and for you all. The recording will be uploaded to Vimeo in about 3 days' time, so you should receive a link to this recording then. And with that, we can start with today's session, and I'll pass it over to you, Shantena. Welcome.
Thank you, James, and thank you, everyone. I will give a short introduction to the whole series over 5 weekends, and then move on from there into today's session, which will be a conversation between Anjali, Andrew, and myself. I would like to start with a few quotes of my favorite Greek philosopher, Heraclitus, who has a very interesting and deep understanding of duality and non-duality. One quote is, "It is what opposes that helps." Couples, and by couples it means like things that go together, are wholes and not wholes. What agrees and what disagrees. The concordant and the discordant. God is day and night, winter and summer, war and peace, surfeit and hunger. And the last quote I'd like to propose, and it is the same thing in us that is quick and dead, awake and asleep, young and old. Well, what Heraclitus is pointing to is our perception of reality is essentially dual. We perceive contrasts, and what has no contrast, what stays the same, gets filtered out the field of attention as irrelevant for survival. And change is essentially dual. It's what is and what becomes, what's there and what becomes after. And the most fundamental duality is probably the duality of subject and object, perceiver and perceived, consciousness and world, I and not I. And this original two is reflected in innumerable, like in a house of mirror, is reflected in innumerable forms in culture, religion, philosophy, day and night, good and evil, God and the devil. And as Heraclitus points out, also whole and not whole. The duality of the dual and the non-dual. An interesting perspective on the complementarity of opposites is the point of view of our friend Ian McGilchrist, which you will meet in this series through the reading of Mark Vernon. Ian looks at the two hemispheres of the brain as two different, fundamentally different modes of processing information, to different modes of accessing reality. One of them, the left brain, left hemisphere, corresponds to a detailed analytic taking in of things. It focuses on differences, and it's very much concerned with immediate survival and distinguishing what is helpful and what is damaging in our environment. The other hemisphere, the right hemisphere, corresponds to a global view of things, corresponds to seeing the oneness, the connection, while the analytic hemisphere is centered on I and not I, the right brain is focusing on a diffused consciousness, the sense of belonging to a larger pattern. But so interestingly enough, the right brain is focusing on the oneness of the two brains. So it's in a way, it's duality, and in another way, it's a perception which is beyond duality. It catches what is actually joined, what is actually one within the dual. This notion of the complementarity of opposites appears also in physics. One of the fundamental characteristics of quantum physics, which distinguishes from classical physics, is the notion of complementarity. Complementary observables, like, for example, the position and the velocity of a particle, are such that you cannot know with complete precision both of them. As you acquire information about one of them, you lose information about the other. So in that respect, quantum physics is like a balloon that when you compress it in one place, it bulges out in another place. Niels Bohr, who's the person who introduced this notion of complementarity in quantum physics, had a very interesting, wider perception of the notion of complementarity way beyond physics strictly. He is known to have said the opposite of a profound truth may very well be another profound truth. Jung is another master of complementarity, of the complementarity of opposites. Talking about the Chinese understanding of polarities, which also is very much complementarity of opposites. Jung says, the Chinese never fail to recognize the paradoxes and the polarity inherent in what is alive. The opposites always balance one another, a sign of high culture. One-sidedness, though it lends momentum, is a mark of barbarism. And he adds, quite obviously, the Chinese owes the finding of this path to the fact that he was never able to force the opposites in human nature so far apart that all conscious connection between them was lost. The Chinese has such an all-inclusive consciousness because, as in the case of primitive mentality, the ya and the nay have remained in their original proximity. A Chinese master for whom the yes and the no remained in their original proximity is certainly Lao Tzu. In the second chapter of the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu says, when in the world all appreciate beauty as beauty, then ugliness is already there. When all appreciate good as good, then bad is already there. Therefore, being and non-being generate each other. Difficult and easy complete each other. Long and short define each other. This duality as a fundamental fact of experience is reflected in mythology. In the Upanishad, Brahman, the creator, gets bored of his eternal perfection an unchanging oneness, and creates the world in order to uh, experience himself or herself and enjoy the play of opposites, enjoy the meeting of the bull and the cow. In the West, the dualistic view has predominate, but there's still like a long tradition of non-dual thinking in the West. And one very significant representative of it is Baruch Spinoza, that Andrew will talk about. Baruch's formula, Deus sive natura, God or nature. It's like these two things are one, and yet there are two, or more than two. They are like the innumerable forms of life. So the multiplicity and the oneness is a key theme of this series. And maybe the strongest expression of it, of complementarity, is the one formulated in the Heart Sutra of Buddhist tradition. The oneness of form and emptiness. The Heart Sutra says, therefore, Sariputra, form is emptiness, and the very emptiness is form. Emptiness does not differ from form. Form does not differ from emptiness. Whatever is form, that is emptiness. Whatever is emptiness, that is form. So that will be the theme of this whole series. A series of talk exploring duality from many perspectives, like too many to mention them at this stage. But let me give you just a very short summary, a very short taste of what is to come. A very special feature of this series is the fact that it's kind of a series within the series that Mark Vernon will explore the mystical path in the West through 4 Sundays of this series. Each time talking about a representative figure of Western mysticism. Plato, Dante, William Blake, and Ian McGilchrist. On the Saturdays, various presenters will alternate. In this first Saturday, I'll be with you with Andrew and Anjali. In the following Saturday, filmmaker Jenna Axelrod, who's with us tonight, and the physicist and mathematician Basil Hiley, who was a student and collaborator of David Bohm, will look at non-dual perspective on the universe based on the notion of the quantum potential, a notion that was introduced by David Bohm and developed by Basil Hiley. Jenna will make sure that when Basil Hiley flies away in his imperial mathematics, will pull his by the feet down to earth. The next Saturday, Ruth Kastner, quantum physicist, and the neuroscientist and philosopher Gary Goldberg will talk about connecting the actual things in space-time, the manifest form of reality, with the reality of possibility in quantum land. This will be based on a transactional interpretation of quantum physics of Ruth Kastner, in which all interaction involves an exchange of active information through waves traveling forward and backward in time. So that will be a very interesting and unusual perception. David Schramm will be with us for another Saturday. He's another friend and student of David Bohm, and he will guide on a mystical voyage inspired by Bohm's self-inquiry, a journey which does not reject anything, but enters deeply into the present. A journey to the farthest shore, to use the Buddhist expression, that is ultimately recognized to be identical with this shore, with the ground we stand on. Then Mark Saban, the Jungian analyst, will introduce two personalities of Jung and explore how this double personality is reflected in the shape of Jung's psychology. Finally, on the last day of this series, I will be with my friend Mauro Bergonzi, a teacher and practitioner of Advaita Vedanta, in an exploration of various facets of non-duality. And with this, it's my pleasure to move on to our conversation with Anjali and Andrew. So on to one of you, Anjali and Andrew, and thank you, everyone.
Shall I go first, Anjali, or do you?
Yes, please, that would be great. Yeah.
I just wanted to say that I've been engaged for many years with the whole issue of duality and non-duality. And this morning I thought, as all good presenters do, I would look up on Wikipedia exactly what they mean. And I found a link in Wikipedia to a list of dualities. And in mathematics, there are 54 of them, which I don't think we need go into today. In philosophy and religion, 5, which I think we'll spend most of today with. In engineering, 3, and in physics, 16. And I'm sure we'll touch on complementarity in physics as well. And it also mentioned non-dualism or non-duality, which is a term I find kicked around quite a lot. It described it as a fuzzy concept, which I found rather reassuring in a way, because although I use the term, I'm not entirely sure what we're talking about. So since the title of our topic today is a conversation about duality and non-duality in East and West, I don't know what is the best way in to this. Sort of, we've got a list of topics to cover. When we had a preliminary chat, we thought we'd kick off with religion and philosophy, and then move on to physics, and then the mind matter conundrum. Where do the others want to start?
Why not? Sounds good.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Actually,
Anjali,
I'd like to start by
yeah.
asking, like, what is duality and non-duality for each of us? I mean, just sort of ground it beyond the concepts in terms of how we experience it.
Well, I think for me, I would say my everyday experience is of duality, of me and the other, of mind. And I mean, it's, I will go on to critique Descartes, but Descartes is nonetheless the intuitive way of understanding my experience in the world. Now, there are moments of non-duality, but I would say they are not persistent. Let's put it like that. I don't practice meditation. I do practice Tai Chi, as you can see from the poster behind me. For example, there are moments when I don't know whether I'm doing Tai Chi or Tai Chi is doing me. Mm-hmm. So that's a very physical experience of it. We talk about communion with nature as well. There are moments, I mean, as both of you know, I was interested in Krishnamurti long before I was interested in Jung, and he talked about these instances in which the I simply disappears. We are there in the moment. That, for me, I would say, is a non-dual experience. How about you, or Shantena?
I mean, I agree that the moments, actually experiential moments of non-duality are rare. And for me, they've happened more through actually, like with dance. Sometimes you're no more dancing, you just move, and there's that sense of there's no ego in it at that moment. But also, I think for me, it has come through more an intellectual sort of exploration of the concepts when listening to the breakdown of ideas of non-duality from an Advaitic system, or in that sense, it's these moments and these flashes of being able to, I think, apprehend it, if not stay with it all the time. And this is a little bit more questionable, but I think when I was working on my thesis, holding the idea of paradox, which I think, Shantena, comes to your idea of complementarity, that ultimately with Jung's idea of holding the opposites together or not projecting shadow, that somehow it for me, it comes more from an ethical need to not completely split an other. And in those moments, it's holding the paradox of the self and the other, and that I think for me is where non-duality actually really makes a difference in terms of really allowing the concept to embody not merely as some sort of like spiritual idea, but really as an ethical imperative. I think that's where for me I feel it's deeply important.
It's a difficult question. In a way, although duality is the most immediate experience we have, I think in the sense of, as I was saying before, change as essential to our perception of reality. And what's unchanging is uninteresting. Uninteresting in a fundamental sense. It's like it's not apt for survival. But on the other hand, it's like the whole phantasmagoria of experience just unfolds on the screen of consciousness. And it's only arbitrarily that we divide it into separate objects, separate existences. Ultimately, there's just consciousness unfolding. But consciousness has form. And one of these forms is what we call matter. Matter is a pattern of experience, pattern of consciousness. It has, consciousness is structured in such a way that I perceive in this moment this screen in front of me, while I'm not perceiving like directly you, Anjali, and you, Andrew. If I move behind my computer, I see the other side of it. This regularities is what I call matter. And I describe myself as the experiences as mind or consciousness. So difficult. Difficult because it's essentially ambiguous. It is both at once. It is dual and non-dual. The non-duality of duality and non-duality.
I think it becomes complicated when one tends to intrinsically separate it out, right? Like saying one is an experience that's entirely opposed to the other. And I think maybe like in the Indian traditions, or when you're in really deep states of meditation or samadhi, or that you can really touch that space. But for us at another level, somehow it's about not splitting the experiences and being able to hold that tension between the fact that it is both and at the same time, and because our perceptual systems tend to immediately split into absolute dualisms, we are unable to hold that sense of unity at the same time. And I'm wondering whether that's where we tend to struggle, because when we're trying to understand it, we're trying to posit exactly the opposite, when in some ways it's not, right? It's, I don't know, just a question.
Right.
I'm wondering if I could try to show just a handful of slides, because we're talking about philosophy of mind here, and we're talking about duality and non-duality. Mm-hmm. And this is very short, but sometimes a picture or a diagram is worth 1,000 words. If I could try to do it without breaking the whole system, give me a go. Let me see. Oh, wait a minute here. Can everybody see that?
Yes, Western philosophy.
Properly. Good. Okay, well, this was a nice little discovery from Wikipedia this morning, because it really summed up in one slide that this is coming from the Western approach, but I'm sure Anjali and you can do respect to India and China in turn, but this is the sort of Western origin, if you like, beginning with Descartes, of course, where physical and mental, if you like, are completely separated, but of equal standing. And then physicalism, which is what we're pretty much conditioned to accept these days, treats mind as an epiphenomenon of matter. In other words, the physical wetware, the brain in our skulls, generates mind, and that's all there is to it. And anybody who has gone through the 3 splendid books of the Sursem project, Irreducible Mind, Beyond Physicalism, and whatever the third one's called, I've forgotten, there are simply too many transgressions of that for it to be plausible any longer. And then the opposite of that is idealism, which probably its most well-known proponent these days is Bernardo Kastrup. I'm no philosopher, but I know it goes back at least as far as the great physicist Max Planck, who was absolutely sure that consciousness was primary. And then there's a third way, neutral monism, and this is where I think non-duality and duality come together. So you mentioned Spinoza, and this is just a schematic of their 2 worldviews, if you like. So the crucial difference is Spinoza's substance. I mean, substance here literally means to stand beneath. This is the psychophysically neutral underpinning of the world that we experience, the world of mind and the world of matter that we experience. And this is just an introduction today. So I'm going through this at lightning speed, but it finds expression recently, of course, in David Bohm's Implicate Order. And I've put a reference there at the bottom of this slide, Harold Atmanspacher's absolutely wonderful essay, 20th Century Versions of Dual Aspect Thinking. I'm very excited that he'll be coming to Paris in June. And I really do recommend that as a good overview of what he calls dual aspect thinking. And there are other precursors, people like Whitehead, Russell, and so on. And then the one that, so I'm familiar with David Bohm through Krishnamurti, and then as a Jungian analyst, I'm familiar with Jung's collaboration with Wolfgang Pauli. And in both of these slides, what is below the horizontal dividing line is the ontic domain. It's a domain that we simply cannot ever experience. What we can experience is above. But I've shaded these slides because it's not a hard and fast boundary. It can move up and down. And depending on its position, you get phenomena such as synchronicity happening, these inexplicable, these acausal connections between a mental event and a physical event. You can get dissociation, which is the opposite, and so on. And then I just throw in this last slide, which I'm not going to begin to explain. No, not because it won't work. That's okay. The last slide was simply Jung's structure of the self, and it is far too complicated for me to try and explain, so the computer has intervened. But sorry, that's a whistle-stop tour of a Western approach, if you like, to the philosophy of mind. I don't know if that is helpful, because it would be interesting to contrast with more Eastern approaches.
Yeah. I mean, I'm no expert on Eastern approaches, but I think one of the things that for me immediately that comes up is that for instance, when we use the word consciousness, we are actually using the same word in a whole lot of different ways. And one of the differences that I found when I was trying to look at it is that one way in which we use consciousness in an everyday basis is to actually talk about mental phenomena, right? Whether we localize it or it's non-local. But another way in which consciousness is actually used within a lot of Indian philosophical systems is absolute phenomena, and it's not. It is not mental phenomena, and I think this is where we tend to then maybe hit epistemological differences. And I don't know what Shantena means, because I remember, the other day when we were talking, Andrew, you spoke about phenomena arising, being experienced in consciousness, and Shantena talked about phenomena arising in consciousness, which is what I think you were trying to express today about matter having, structure within, and I think they're different things. Right? What experiencing in consciousness still belongs to the mental domain of mind as we know it, but consciousness as absolute phenomena, as used in many Indian systems, I think is the same word but means another thing. And I've actually found this intriguing to engage with. I don't know what you think, but
yeah. And I think it's actually quite interesting that the Indian or the Eastern point of view, like of consciousness as primary and consciousness as the source, has an interesting resonance in physics. In that physics is much more compatible with oneness than with separately existing experiencing subjects. Physics describes reality in terms of extended fields that extend throughout the universe. So like this individual person, this individual body that I am, is just an interference pattern of these infinitely extended fields, which generate this phenomenon in space-time, like it generates all these other phenomena in space-time, the phenomenon Anjali and the phenomenon Andrew, and the phenomenon of all of you who are listening. So on one hand, physics focuses on what divides, but in another point of view, it's actually much more compatible with a one reality, one consciousness, reality emerging within one consciousness.
Anjali, was your question coming down to language? Because, I mean, I think we would all agree that consciousness is all we can know. But it's the linguistic difference between experiencing and arising, I think, that there's something behind that. And in our sort of preliminary discussion, you also raised, for example, the question of thinking of things as processes, not objects. And I went away and thought about the Chinese polarities of yin and yang, which are qualities. So in at least a European language, but talking about the difference between nouns and verbs and adjectives. But how do we get, what is the difference between experiencing and arising?
I would say that at the most immediate level, experiencing implies something pre-existing. It's experiencing something which is there. Arising does not necessarily imply something that pre-exists, but something that exists in the act of being experienced.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, because I think experiencing in a way is so let me just, from Sankhya philosophy, which is basically actually dualistic, but there's a very clear distinction made between Prakriti and Purush, between matter and consciousness, which I think we're talking about in this one unchanging modality, or like even with Atman Shpaka, that level that is in a way also unexperienceable from this realm. And from that perspective, the contents of mind belong to materiality. I mean, this is where I'm talking about language. So even if we're experiencing on a mental level, we're experiencing because we experience through body, through perception, perceptual organs, through these sorts of things, and process it in mind. But then consciousness becomes something much more ambiguous to describe, because consciousness is that through which everything then arises. And it's because of the arising we experience. So actually we're sort of collapsing different layers of reality at the same time, even as we're trying to speak about it.
Yes.
Yeah.
So does matter really exist?
Well, I don't know, but I think in physics it seems to keep deeper, doesn't it? As you go like deeper and deeper into it, it becomes more and more insubstantial.
Indeed.
Andrew, I mean, at one level it does. When you hit your leg against something, it hurts like crazy.
I was just going to say, I slipped on some ice in December and broke 2 vertebrae. So I'm fairly convinced that matter exists, or at least I have a very powerful experience of matter existing.
Yes, but what it is?
Yeah.
What is it?
Or rather, what is existence and non-existence, if we go to a more fundamental level? Like, what do we mean by existence and non-existence when we're speaking from this more non-dual perspective? From a dualistic everyday experience, yes, we get it. But from a non-dual perspective, that itself becomes problematized.
I'm reminded of one passage in Chuang-Tzu, in which the author is like meeting non-being and finally reaches the conclusion that is talking to non-being as a person, and finally reaches the conclusion that this guy, I cannot fathom him. He's not even non-existent, but he claims that non-existent doesn't exist. Not sure I'm quoting him very exactly, but something of that order.
Yeah.
Would you like to say something, Shantena, about Chinese dualities beyond existence, non-existence, mind, matter? Because it's predicated, the whole cosmology is predicated on dualities, isn't it?
Yeah, and yet the fundamental duality of yin and yang is represented in this diagram, the Tai Chi, in which one constantly moves into the other. And when one of them reaches its full expression, the seed of the opposite starts growing. So it's two. It's definitely two. But this two is definitely one.
And that resonates with Heraclitus in the West. And of course,
Yeah.
Jung picked it up as the concept of enantiodromia,
Right.
which simply seems to be, I don't know if axiomatic is right, the word sui generis, is it? It's without precedent. It just is.
Uh-huh.
Which is one of the definitions of Nirguna Brahman, or when we want to talk about it just is, right? It's isness consciousness, and it's this sort of hyphenated word because there's no exact translation into isness or consciousness. So somehow you're held in that space. And though there's so much of plurality, the underground ground of being, I think it was Paul Tillich who used that term, I'm not sure, is this isness consciousness. So when we're speaking about non-duality, we're not collapsing things into a sameness, because of course the universe exists in its fantastic infinity, but it is that is, you know.
Yes, this fantastic infinite multiplicity of forms.
Mm-hmm.
They don't seem to have any substantial individual existence.
Yeah.
Or at least, as far as we dig in physics, we don't seem to reach anything solid. But I experience myself as me. And how do individual beings come to be? Who are we?
Are we? I think some of the question you're asking is, are we? Andrew, would you, from sort of Harold Atmanspacher and dual aspect monism, sort of come to the same place as like where Shantena is speaking from, or is there a difference? Or
Well, I hesitate to speak for Harold, but I think one of the drawbacks of this dual aspect monism, that Paula Jung and David Bohm are variants of that, he would say, is that it simply kicks the can down the road. In other words, everything is shunted to this domain. You can call it the implicate order, you can call it the unus mundus, but it's a domain rather conveniently beyond our possible perception, beyond consciousness, beyond understanding, which for a scientist, and Harold Atmanspacher is a very good theoretical physicist, it's a very unsatisfactory end point in the argument. But I personally find that class, if you like, of explanations of mind matter the most satisfying.
I would agree with that. Another option that we could compare this with is pantheism. The idea that all beings are conscious. Beings are anything, like from electrons to galaxies,
Yeah.
passing through us, incidentally. It makes me, I'm very sympathetic to it, but it makes me also slightly uncomfortable. As if it's kind of anthropomorphic. The projection of myself onto everything.
Mm.
So the non-dual monism, on the other hand, it seems more solid from that point of view.
Mm.
But also more indefinite. What's this that's beyond this and that?
But if you work with some of the philosophical ideas, they're also saying that what's this that is beyond this and that, but is also this and that. That in a sense, like the mistake is to posit something beyond, you know.
Yes.
It's like if the Buddhists are talking about emptiness or the Vedantists are talking about fullness, the words itself can be misunderstood to posit something beyond, but it's not a thingness beyond, right? It's no thingness in some ways. And I think that's where then it's not just wonderful intellectual conjecture, which is fabulous, but it's like, so what are the implications for the world and for how we behave and for our relationship to ecology and to other beings? Or do you know what I'm saying? It is also here at in this very moment.
Mm-hmm.
No?
That's what Jung and Pauli were working on, isn't it?
Yeah, with cycloid and synchronicity. And...
You mentioned synchronicity, Andrew.
Mm-hmm.
How do you see the connection between synchronicity and duality and non-duality?
I think synchronicity is a fleeting experience of the non-dual.
Mm.
But it can't be willed into being. Right. I'm thinking about what you're saying about pantheism, and there maybe sort of an anthropomorphic critique of it. I mean, there are variants of this, you know, and there's panentheism as well, where God, the divine, is supraordinate to and in all matter, in the whole cosmos. There's panpsychism, you know, where consciousness is everywhere. I've given a couple of lectures at our Jungian school on non-local mind, but with hindsight, I'm not very happy with the title at all. Because I think whether we talk about the implicate order or the unus mundus, we're talking about a phenomenon that is neither mind nor matter and is both. Yeah. and therefore we not only can we not experience it directly, we can't even envisage it, it seems to me. But what I think happens perhaps in the human brain, perhaps in the brain of a worm, perhaps in the whatever it is that makes a plant sentient, whatever, is this decomposition or unfolding, if you like, according to the needs of that organism. I think that makes it a little less anthropocentric. You know?
Yeah, I sense that this conversation is kind of coming to the edge of language.
Yeah.
Yes.
We need Leroy here. Yes.
Chatting about the unspeakable.
Yes. Another lovely duality, Shantena. It is traditional that whenever I am doing anything to do with the Paris Center, I quote that wonderful passage that you put in your introduction to the Eranos I Ching about life arising at the edge between order and chaos.
Oh, yeah, yes.
You know, and so there is a really creative dynamic arising out of a duality.
Yeah.
I mean, that's in to use the word Maya, in the Vedantic system, it's not merely illusion, it's also creativity. You know, that somehow this is meant to be, and it is that creative energy of being. It's not, it's illusory if you see only the distinctions and not the fundamental unity, but at the same time, it is meant to be so splendid, you know.
Yeah. I wonder whether it's a good place to open up the conversation to the audience. What do you guys feel? Or is something missing, or something you would like to add?
We didn't really follow up on Anjali's nudge in the direction of ethics.
Okay, let's do that.
Which I think is important. And I'll just chip in with my very little bit, because as you know, I'm something of well, I call myself a deep ecologist because I'm very influenced by what the Norwegian philosopher Arne Næss wrote about. And he had this concept of the ecological self. And although, as far as I've been able to find out, he was completely unaware of Jung. He knew Erich Fromm. He was also very influenced by Spinoza, incidentally. But he had this concept of the ecological self, which, like Jung's self with a capital S, has its origin in the Upanishads. So there's a nice bit of Western hijacking of Indian thought there. And he talked simply about this expanded sense of identity, identification with nature, with the other than human world. And if we don't identify with it, we can't care for it. Why should we? It's separate, it's cut off, it's isolated. So that, if you like, is a revision of our relationship with the other than human world that is moving in the direction of being non-dual, I would say. And I think Anjali, you could speak to that, if you like, extension in a social rather than ecological context a bit.
Yeah, because I think, sorry.
I'm here, I'm following it. I just need to recharge my computer.
Well, go, Anjali, but we don't have to wait for
Shantena. Yeah, no, I think that's why for me, I think, you know, when I look at the work of more contemporary philosophers in India, or sacred souls, if you want to call it, people like Swami Vivekananda, or even a political personality like Gandhi, for instance, with all the, I mean, we can make them complex, but I think that that's the point for me. Or even when Jung is talking about, you know, Neumann talks about a new ethic, I really feel that this sort of non-dual philosophizing is not in the air. It really is an imperative, specifically even today, where we tend to get so polarized in oppositions, where actually if you're looking at the fundamental unity of all things, we're looking at Jung's idea of holding the opposites together, and whatever that other is that you can't stand is an aspect of yourself and the self in a larger way that you have to meet, or that everything in the world, you may talk about it as ecology, but human beings belong in ecology. So whether it is in a social context or a non-human context, where it's all one whole, one unity, and we are meeting aspects of being in that. And I think from there, then it becomes, to me, it asks very deep questions about how do you interact? How do you behave? How do you respond, even if you disagree with something? Because in a very simple sense, that's you and God meeting you back, if we want to use the word. So if everything is sacred, how do we then respond to the other? And specifically, not when we like the other, but when we dislike the other, you know, and that I don't like your politics, or I hate the wall that like I banged my leg into, and like, so what do? Destroy it? Or do I find a way of relationship that is also sacred and respectful, even if with differences? Because I don't think it's meant to collapse differences or collapse having conversations, but how we have the conversations and how we are relating to the same aspects of being is where then I think this conversation can be grounded in, how do I put it into my life? You know, how do I not simply just talk about it, it's fabulous, but then what? That's where I think I was coming from with ethics. And ethics is not simply dualistic, something is right and wrong, but really holding complexity of, yeah.
You're muted, Shantena, or miming.
Yep. What I hear you saying, Anjali, is something like every conversation is a conversation with God.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes God takes form which are very uncomfortable.
Yes. Yes.
But if we keep in mind that that's still God.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the conundrum of, okay, so you, like a baby is born into the world. Do you rejoice and have joy because it's born into life? Or do you sorrow because it's born into death? I mean, this is what I'm saying. Like, I know it sounds horrible, but it really is about holding that tension, isn't it? And is death sorrowful, or is it back into the pleroma? It is this sort of complexity that we're forced to, I would like to hold. I'm not saying I do it. I mean, my God, I'm not saying I'm there, but I would really like to be able to hold that place, you know. I don't know.
Chuang Tzu says something like, the place where you can hold duality and non-duality together is the hinge of Tao.
Oh, that's lovely. Hmm.
That seems like a good concluding quote, Shantena.
Yeah, we could use it to open up. I see that there's people who have raised their hands. So it looks like some people would like to jump into this conversation. Shall we open it?
Sure, we can open, no problem. So yeah, so as I said at the beginning of sorry. First of all, I'd just like to thank you all three, Anjali, Andrew, and Shantena. It's been really amazing to listen into this conversation. So thank you all so much. And to the audience, yes, we can open up the Q&A. To ask a question, you can use to raise your hand or write it in the chat or physically raise your hand. I know some of you have already done that, but we'll start with someone who asks a question in the chat. They ask, in order to do good, do we have to accept that evil will occur? As Shantena said earlier, while we're doing something, the seed of the opposite is growing. How can we do good without evil occurring? Is there some philosopher who addresses this? And then later on in the chat also asks, if everything is sacred, how do we respond to evil?
I feel like here Jung brings in something where he's spoken about how within the monotheistic tradition, good and evil are so absolutely split that we then think about good on the one side and evil on the other. And that's where we're mutually projecting, the shadow. But I feel if we hold it together, it's not about collapsing the difference between good and evil, if we want to talk about it, or something that like fundamentally morally feels antithetical to oneself. I think it's about being able to hold hold an aspect of being that belongs to us too. And that unspeakable evil that I talk about on the other side also does belong to me in a way. And I think this is where Jung's concept of the shadow is so fundamental. And if I can see the parts of myself that I don't want to see reflected in the other, then maybe I can do or respond in a more nuanced way without completely othering. Or rather, at least not deny that it's not part of me too. I think that's more important. I may not want to act on it, but it is also part of me because it belongs with everything. I don't know if that is, Andrew, Shantena?
I agree with you, Anjali. It's like recognizing that all interaction is an interaction with God. Does not exclude the fact that that specific God form I'm dealing with might be something I absolutely don't want. It's not good. But still, it is part of me, and it's part of the whole.
Mm-hmm.
What's the dance? What's the balance there? Will have to be invented case in each specific case. I don't think there's any recipe for how to handle evil.
Or any recipe to be absolutely 100% sure of the rightness of your position. I think that's moral, right? Like you feel something against unspeakable evil that we're all capable of, but not to sort of keep yourself out of the equation.
Right.
I think that's the humbling part. You know, you act ethically, but don't think that it's beyond you.
I think it was Goethe that said, there isn't a crime known to mankind that I'm not capable of committing. Mm-hmm. And you just said the evil that we're all capable of. That's an easy thing to say. It's a very hard thing to accept. I struggle with it. We, as Jungians, we talk a lot about integrating the shadow. I'm not sure exactly what that means. I'm not sure. I mean, I really tried to stay off the subject of good and evil today. It's a really, really obvious duality. And for me, it's in a way the hardest one to wrestle with. Jung was absolutely sure that evil was an active principle, not just the absence of good. He rejected the Catholic doctrine of privatio boni. You know, that's why he fell out with White. I'll shut up because this is a tough one for me.
Great. Well, thank you for answering that question. The problem of evil is a difficult one, so thank you for that. Next we'll go to Susan as a question for us.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to join the conversation. I'm not sure it's as much a question as some thoughts and observations and your perspective on it. First of all, Andrew, when you said that you don't do meditation, but you do Tai Chi, you are doing meditation because you're doing movement meditation. And that relates back to the Tai Chi symbol that you were, that Shantena, that you were talking about, because in the Tai Chi symbol, the yin is in the yang and the yang is in the yin, right? So they're not really separate, right? So there's a little dot in the yang that represents the yin, and there's a little dot in the yin that represents the yang. So, and when you're doing meditation, I'm just using meditation as an example. When you're doing meditation, you think you're sitting still, but it's a very active process. You know, your mind's going, the emotions are going, there's so much going on. So in the stillness is the action, and in the action is the stillness. So, you know, maybe it's just a matter of emphasis or perspective, but I don't see it as separate, right? And it merges into each other. So it's like, you know, like when you're looking at an elephant, are you looking at the tail or are you looking at the trunk? It's still the elephant, right? So that was one thing that I wanted to bring up. And then I only know it through Buddhism. It's called Indra's net, where it's like a fisherman's net, right? Or like the field. And we're each jewels in that, right? But we're each connected to each other. What happens here is going to be reflected here, although we may not see it. Shantena, I just wanted to get your perspective, and I'm not a physicist, but there was an experiment. I don't know if it was protons, I don't know if it's electrons. I mean, that all gets mixed up for me. But where it was split and they went in opposite directions, and then they did 1-to-1, and at the very same moment, the other reacted. So how can we really be separate? So, you know, Thich Nhat Hanh just recently died. Is he really not here? Well, you know, he went into this a lot he went into this a lot. Or is he living in my heart? Is he living in the dirt of the ground? Is his consciousness here or not here? Not sure it's not here. And as far as you said, we were getting good and bad. We have good and bad experiences, but we can't see it sometimes at the time, what that mission is. I mean, what is good and bad? And yes, I do think that there is some real evil, but it's the expression, I think, of what we were saying. It's in all of us. It's part of the whole. And that's the isness that I think can be experienced. And I don't think there's any word for it. It's not that, my name is Susan, I'm Susaning, I'm creationing. It's not that that's gone, but it's that and with the isness.
Thank you. Let me just comment on the notion you brought up of entanglement, of this connection, because it's very interesting and it's not usually understood correctly. The fact that things are connected beyond the exchange of any signal, it's absolutely general. So in the whole universe, everything is entangled with everything else. The only reason why we do not experience it directly, it's because that entanglement is too complex and too subtle. We're able to observe it only when we reduce it to interaction between two particles within a vacuum tube kept like isolated from all the rest of the universe. Then we can see it. But it doesn't mean that it's only existing on that level. It's everywhere. We're part of it. But it's extremely, extremely, extremely complex, way beyond what's easily recognizable. But so thank you. That's absolutely true.
Well, thank you, Susan, for coming in. Next, we'll go to John Briggs. Oh, you're just muted, John.
Hi, John.
Thank you all for a very interesting discussion. And it's a great topic. Really glad you're doing it. Just fiddle in my computer here. A couple of thoughts. One of my favorite Chuang Tzu quotes, which I think might be relevant here, is he makes the statement, the 10,000 things in I are one, and the one and what I've just said about that are two, and the two and what I said about that are three. And if we go on in this way, even the cleverest mathematician won't tell where we'll end. The wonderful irony, I think, sort of takes us to another place, which may not be contained in all that's been said. But I had a thought. There's certainly I don't know what, an impetus in this topic to begin with human beings, with the dilemmas of human consciousness and the tensions that exist in the dualities there. I know that the indigenous people that we've been talking to wouldn't start there. They would start with Mother Earth. And I think the conversation becomes quite different if you start with Mother Earth. I couldn't tell you exactly how it would be different, but I know it would be different. In terms of the question of good and evil, I had a brief conversation with a Navajo a number of years ago, and he said, you know, you need, it's like two hands. You need the left hand and the right hand in order to make anything. So my impression is that in those indigenous cultures, they don't, the tension between the opposites, they don't attempt to resolve them. They use them. So they make something of them, or that is how things are made through that tension. A sort of example of that is my friend Tiokasin Ghost Horse was talking about when he does a fire, he does a kind of ceremonial fire and invites people if they want to come to it. And they just sort of show up or don't show up, and he has the fire, and he says that at the end of the fire, he never puts the fire out with water, but he spreads the coals, and when he spreads the coals, invariably a meteor will go through the sky after that. Now, of course, that's synchronicity. But I think it also illustrates a sense in which when we're trying to resolve opposites, we try to do it with causality. And as Bohm pointed out, our causality is that we ordinarily use is limited. And if you are serious about causality, you have to recognize that everything causes everything else. And then it gets very complex, like Shantena was just describing with entanglement. The Buddhist dependent origination, similar idea. But what Tiokasin is talking about, and a way to think about it, is that it's a correlation. So the universe is held together by correlations, and they show up. And we're trying to say, you know, so the meteor shows up, or another friend described doing ceremonies, and when he said, whenever I do this ceremony, all kinds of birds show up. So the birds show up, and we're trying to figure out, well, why do they show up? But that's not a question that they're concerned with, because they, in a sense, they know why. It's because the universe is one thing. It's a whole. So I just offer that possibility to think in another frame from the one that we ordinarily use.
Thank you. Nice little coincidence or synchronicity. Today I made a fire. I'm burning like branches, and the season is extremely dry in southern Spain. So this was a delicate operation, but kindly the universe sent in a little rain to help me.
It becomes very interesting if you start to look at things that way. You know, if you don't think of synchronicities as some rare occurrence, but something that actually happens all the time. And of course, we discount it with our logical minds. But if you are open to it, something happens. There's a change in consciousness of some sort.
Your mentioning of Mother Earth and correlations has set me up for a shameless book plug. Because I wrote this book, Gaia, Psyche and Deep Ecology, in which I extrapolate from the Paula Jung conjecture to correlate the dynamics, the structure, the contents, the pathologies of the human psyche and the planet as a whole. And I think it's very interesting that as we are afflicted with what Jung called the monotheism of consciousness, we are at the same time destroying the earth in the Anthropocene, which is the human dominance, if you like, our disproportionate influence on the planet. So Yeah, it's very
Yeah.
interesting to see the patterns is all I would say. Yeah.
So we need to be open to the wisdom of rocks.
Sure. I think the difference as a Westerner is I can come to that intellectually, but we go right back to Anjali's starting, and I think toughest question of the lot: how do we experience this?
Mm-hmm.
And it is so alien to a European culture.
Yeah. I think that's something that we're very lucky with in the East, that somehow, because of these philosophies or whatever it is, this worldview that we're soaked in, that in some ways, without even knowing it, you have somehow a sense of plurality. You know, there isn't a single truth or a single way of being, and it can get difficult and complicated, but yeah, I think that you just inherit some sort of plural way of experiencing the world, which we quite take for granted, I think. You know.
I've taken a very small step in that direction. As you know, my wife, Yuriko, is Japanese. And so when talking about any kind of organism, she will talk about someone, not something.
Mm-hmm.
It's a person. And I just do that naturally now. It begins to shift one's attitude.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, John, for coming in. It's always great to hear you speak and hear your thoughts. Just before we move on, I'd just like to remind everyone just to be sort of brief and focused with your questions, just because we've got many questions to go through and we want to hear everyone speak. We'll go next to Jari.
Okay. My sincere thanks. Having opportunity to hear these wonderful discussions, and my question is directed to Mr. Sabbadini because his background is in physics. Andrew was addressing in his PowerPoint presentation interesting concept about the nature of reality, this unus mundus or implicate order. In quantum physics, we have a definition of zero-point energy that says that even we cool universe in absolute zero temperature, there will be quantum mechanical vibration everywhere. So it's a certain kind of matter field. In physics, there are four forces: gravity, electromagnetism, strong force, and weak force. But the standard model, that is the best theoretical framework in physics, they haven't managed to unify these four forces, so as we know. My question is simple: is this unus mundus or implicate order, or this zero-point energy that I was describing briefly, some kind of unified field which everything is emerging in the universe, all the matter, particles, energy, primordial unified reality, a kind of. That was my question.
Yeah, good question. I don't think so. I think the unus mundus, whatever it is, it's beyond or underneath all this. It's like our pictures of reality, our pictures of nature change with time. And at present, we recognize like four essential interactions, but there's no telling that tomorrow we won't say there's 5 or 6. But I think physics challenges some of our immediate notions of what reality is like in a very interesting way. Like, in order to complete the picture of the four forces, the one that is still like not in tune with the other ones is gravity. It seems pretty certain that the merging, the fiery marriage, as it has been called, of gravitation with quantum physics will bring about fundamental changes in our understanding of space and time. Especially the notion of time doesn't fit with the conjunction of quantum physics and gravity. So we're gnawing at the edge of the mystery of reality. But the mystery of reality is beyond that. That's my understanding of it. Makes sense to you, yeah, Jerry?
Physics has been trying to unite those forces 100 years without success. So what I have been following, I was studying physics in 1987, 1992 in university. Briefly, I have been following. I'm working in a different field now. I'm an environmental engineer, my profession, but it seems that it will be very difficult to unite these four forces and create certain kind of grand unified theory, or even mastering the electrogravitation that will make possible to develop new ways of transportation if mankind will be able to master electrogravitics, for example, or quantum gravity teleportation. It will make possible to develop teleportation devices. This is like science fiction, okay, but
yeah. No,
physics is a kind of science fiction. If we are talking about quantum entanglement, and even if you are watching the star, Sirius is my favorite star, or Orion belt. When I'm observing the star in the surface of the star happens immediately. The collapse of the electron wave function, like Schrödinger is explaining. So their connection is immediate, it's superluminal, and that's fantastic. And every time when I am remembering this truth, that effects of the quantum mechanics, they are superluminal. Speed of light, it is not the final, it is not the fastest speed in this universe.
Thank you.
In quantum mechanics, everything is instantaneous, superluminal.
difficult questions.
Thank you, Jari, for coming in. Next, we'll go to Manfred.
Thank you very much for this really great dialogue. The question I have is, can I say anything without automatically create the opposite? That means when I say left, I create right. When I say that it's a chair, I have to have an idea what is not a chair. And a German writer, Tucholsky, he said, whole is not thinkable without non-whole. I think that is the question I have.
That's Chuang Tzu, pure Chuang Tzu.
No idea what it is. Thank you.
does it touch on another duality, that between, I went on a bit of a rant about this in my book and tied myself in a knot, but the duality between either or and both and.
I think this is where the idea of relationship comes in that, yes, when you have, can you have one without the other? You immediately constellate the opposite, but one cannot exist without the other at the same time. So I think that's where you have the opposites, but they're also integrally connected. And maybe we hold that together.
But that means whatever I'm saying, it's open to the opposite. I never can say this is right and this is wrong.
Yeah. I mean, I love the idea in Indian systems of when you listen to the stories and the mythologies that I wonder, Shantena, whether there's the similar thing with Tao, that the idea of what is, if you want to call it, one way of looking at evil is when something has gone out of sync. You know, the flow of dharma or the flow of the Tao. Nothing is absolute in itself, but it's something that goes off balance. And whether it's nature that goes off balance or because there's an action and you've done something and it's off balance. And so it's difficult to be absolutely other about anything. So, you know, even the villains or the gods in India are never completely one thing. Part of all the mystery and the play is because somebody does something that sets a whole series of things in motion, and they're neither like absolutely good or absolutely evil. And I think that is, there's a complexity to it that's intriguing, you know.
Anjali, you remind me of the story of the rainmaker.
Yes.
Yeah. There's a great drought in this village, and they call in a man, a rainmaker, and to deal with the problem. And he said, well, just let me live in a hut. I'll lock myself in a hut for 3 days. And 3 days later, it starts raining. And people say, what? How did you do it? So they didn't do anything. Just things were not aligned. So I had to align myself. And by aligning myself, everything got aligned.
And Jung told Barbara Hanna, my entire psychology is in that story. And you must never give a lecture or seminar without telling that story as an introduction.
Okay, so we've done our job.
I can attest to the fact that you cannot have a Jungian training without hearing that story over and over again.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Manfred. It's great to see you, and thank you for coming in. Well, next we will go to Abba.
Thank you, all of you, for whoever organized this forum, and for the three of you to be reflecting and pondering on such a meaningful topic. My question is for Mr. Shantena. I was wondering if you want to expound on a comment you made, which was hinting at our existence as, you know, interference patterns of force fields. I mean, my thought on that is that just seems like happenstance, yet, you know, our lives feel so ordered and planned and structured, following like, you know, the laws of physics and all these sorts of things. So how do we take that notion, which seems very plausible and yet connected to this very material existence with very specific cause and effect laws?
Yeah, yeah. It's like, are we just the play of physical laws? On one level, but these physical laws create the texture of this marvelous, mysterious reality, which is Mother Earth and ourselves and everything. So is it just? It's like it's an awesome mystery.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Abba, for coming in, and welcome to the Power Center. For the last question, we'll just go to Jens.
Yeah, thank you. First, I would like to just say a word of thanks to Andrew for mentioning RNS, who has been one of my favorite philosophers for a long time. But actually, my question is not going to be about him. Although I also like deep ecology, etc. So I'm going to look for your book. Okay, no, my question is, I would like you to a little more critically discuss why you start with two. Why is duality so fundamental? First of all, it's not correct to say that as soon as you say something, you will always have to think of its opposite. Let's just try some counterexamples. When I say red, what is the opposite? When I say green, when I say yellow, etc. So here, you know, we have a notion of complementarity, where you have many different. Or if I say round, what's the opposite? Square, triangular, rectangular. It's not correct that we always have opposites. So, and when we start to discuss philosophy like you did, you know, you discussed, most of this discussion was on ontology, I think. Andrew reminded us that Spinoza was actually, in one sense, a monist, in another sense, a trialist, and in the third sense, because he actually thought there were infinitely many attributes of God, you know. And if we look at Russell's neutral monism, he's also a trialist. If you look at, who shall I say, we had Russell, we had Popper. Here's another guy, you know, he has a third world. There's one philosopher who actually absolutely abhorred two, and that was Peirce. You know, he had firstness, secondness, thirdness, and yeah, I'm not going to go into what those three. It's actually not so easy to explain what he meant by those three, but he had three, and everything in his philosophy is three, not two. So I would like to hear a little more about why you haven't criticized the idea that we have, and you know, three, it doesn't stop there. You could have four, like we heard from physics, they now have four forces. Or if you look at, what shall I say, Hegel had four forms of spirit. You know, he had the individual spirit, he had Volksgeist, people spirit, he had Zeitgeist, time spirit, he had Weltgeist, the world spirit. So philosophers have not, you know, always been so enamored with just two. Myself, I'm actually a kind of latter Spinozist, but I'm a polyaspectualist for various different reasons, which I won't go into now. But, so anyway, I would like you to say a few words why you haven't questioned the idea that you start with two.
Well, I think the dialectics that we've dealt with is actually between one and many. So in a way, it's not so essential that it's two. But between the one and the many, it's the interesting difference.
I agree.
Yeah, I think the idea of duality is really the immediate experience of self and everything other to the self. So yes, I think it's a good question. It's not just one and one, but it is self and everything other to the self. And I think that's that experience of duality, if we want to call it that. But it's not necessarily, how would you like to call it?
I would like a word which captured what Shantena said. Somehow, that it could be many.
Mm-hmm.
So, we have dual aspect theory. So I call my theory multiple aspect theory or poly aspect theory, whatever you want. But it's something which captures the idea that there are many.
Okay. The self and the rest of the world in a way.
Yeah, but it's not maybe not just an undifferentiated rest of the world. Maybe there are distinct things in it, which I believe there are.
Yeah.
It was a question I had written down in my further thoughts was duality versus plurality, which I think is what you're talking about. Perhaps we've just been far too obedient in talking about duality because that's the topic we were given to talk about. When I hear about the four forces in physics as of now, and my background is in applied physics, so I'm not as clever as Shantena, but Jung would have been very happy with that because the number 4 appears throughout Jung's psychology as he viewed it as a number of wholeness. And I mean, there's a lot of analysis of numbers as the purest form of the archetypes as well. Something else I had in the back of my mind, another duality though, is 1 and 0. We live, all this is being done with ones and zeros, with digital technology. Anyway, I'm just throwing that in, but plurality is interesting.
Yeah, it's very interesting actually, thinking of like this whole conversation happening in ones and zeros.
Well, thank you so much, Jens, for coming in. I did say it was the last question, but I could see Alan had his hand up. If it's a brief question, please do come in.
Well, yes, thank you. It's actually on the same topic as the last question. It was just to say that is a reason that we're talking about non-duality, that in a sense there can't be two. Because if one takes knowledge, you have the knower, knowledge, and knowing. You have subject, object, and the space in between. In Einstein's famous equation, you have E equals mc squared, and light seems very, very mysterious. And Shantena, I asked you in a different talk, really the same question about where is this third in the yin yang? And you actually, your answer was that it's where the two meet. And so I'm just wondering if anybody could just comment on the idea that there never is two. There's either one or three, or perhaps many, but I'm just suggesting one or three.
You're calling upon the marriage aspect of the story, which is in the title of the series.
Right.
Yeah, well, in that sense, the marriage is the third, isn't it? There are the two people and the third. So actually, those are really good questions. Do we ever act? I don't know.
Jung wrote that the opposites to the ineradicable and indispensable preconditions of all psychic life. All opposites are intrinsically irreconcilable, but conflict between any pair of opposites generates tension, which motivates the psyche to seek a third possibility that transcends them both. This is the transcendent function. It's like synchronicity. You can't will it into existence. It spontaneously arises. So So there's a very important third in at least Jung's psychology of opposites.
Well, thank you. And isn't it mysterious with E equals mc squared that we have this third thing, light? And I believe David Bohm talked about the universe being frozen light. Shantena, you would know what the quote was.
No, I'm not sure. What was it?
I think he said the universe is
David?
David Bohm,
David Bohm.
a comment about the universe being frozen light.
No, I'm not familiar with that. But certainly light is in some way very fundamental. This fact that it's the connecting between mass and energy, the fact that it's the ultimate speed, at least as far as we know up to now. Our notion of time is not independent from light, actually. Yeah. Light is very interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alan, for coming in. So I know we're on the hour, but maybe we can go a little bit over, mainly because I wanted to just start closing, ask if you had any closing remarks, very short, maybe just a minute each.
No, it feels like you can't close on this topic. It's like everything is wide open now.
I think that's what this introductory conversation perhaps was all about. I feel we've raised far more questions than we've provided answers, and we've left the subsequent speakers the unenviable task of trying to answer them. We've done the easy bit, but I've thoroughly enjoyed talking with you, Anjali and Shantena.
Yes, loved it. Thank you.
Same here, yes.
Oh, great. Well, it's been really fantastic to listen to you all, and great conversations, really. Thank you all. And of course, thank you all to the audience as well, for all your contributions, if you have or not, even just attending has been really great. So if we're closing, I do have actually a bit of some housekeeping things for this series. Firstly, I'd just like to welcome you all to join our forum, Sutra. You should be receiving a link to this forum if you haven't already very shortly. This is basically a space run by yourselves, a community, and it's a great opportunity to share your thoughts and ideas that have been raised during this series with the other participants and also the speakers, who you should also receive a invitation to join shortly. Secondly, I'd like to announce that after 2 years of missing you, we will this year have events face-to-face in Pari. The first event is in June, between the 5th and 12th of June, and it's entitled Re-envisioning Consciousness, where every day we will ask questions such as, how do we understand matter, time, and space, individual consciousness, birth and death, and free will. At this event, we have invited Harold Atmanspacher, Gary Lackman, Ian McGilchrist, John Pickering, William Seeger, Shantena, Angelita Valencia Bourbon, and Beverly Zabriskie. The second event, which will run in August, will be entitled The Enchanted Universe. In the event, we will try to reconnect with the enchantment of this world by having informal conversations with scholars such as Jessica Ball, Patrick Curry, Alex Gomez-Marin, Ruth Kastner, Rutendo Ngara, Hester Reeve, and Andreas Weber. There is also a third event, which is not quite ready, but it should be on our website very soon. Finally, we've talked about future events, but I also like to invite you all to look at our past events. We do have our YouTube channel, which has all of our past free events, and also all the other events will be on our website in the shop. So you should check it out. You should have received now links as well on the chat to all of our face-to-face and YouTube pages. If you have any questions, you can contact us on our website in the contact us section, on social media such as Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or you can email us directly at eleanor@paracenter.com. I hope to also to see you all tomorrow for the first of 4 sessions with Mark Vernon, part of this series. Tomorrow will be on the way of love, Plato and participation in the good, beautiful, and true. If you have any further questions, I'm happy to stay for an extra minute to help you out. But if not, thank you all again. Thank you so much, Angelina, Andrew, and Shantena. And we'll see you again soon here at the Para Center.
Thank you, James.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great.